they didn't forget me. They replaced me. Not all at once, no. It was gradual. Like a button loosened over time, tugged here and there until one day it just slipped off and no one cared to sew it back on. I stood there at the company's 30th anniversary gala, in the very building I helped keep afloat through 2 recessions, listening to the crowd chant my brother's name. People clapped like they'd just witnessed the second coming. Meanwhile, I was listed as support staff on the event planning spreadsheet, not even mentioned in the program. But I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't plead to be seen. Instead, I reached into my blazer and quietly placed a folded document onto the edge of the podium, notarized, binding, and signed by the man who once built everything from a folding desk and a dream. My father. No one saw it coming. But that moment wasn't born on stage. It started in silence long before the applause. My name is Elena Ward. I'm 35, and for the last 10 years, I've been the Chief Financial Officer of Ward & Stratton, a privately held construction tech firm in Denver, Colorado. It used to be a family business. Still is if by family you mean my older brother, the legacy, and me, the logistical inconvenience. Our father, Robert Ward, started this company out of his garage in the early 90s. He built it with 2 things: grit and spreadsheets. I grew up watching him hand-sketch blueprints on napkins and fall asleep on the floor of our living room surrounded by invoices. When I graduated top of my class from NYU's Stern School of Business, I didn't go corporate. I came home. I came home because he asked me to. He said, "This company needs your mind, and your brother needs your balance." Back then I believed him. So I gave up a 6-figure offer in Manhattan to sit at a fold-out desk outside the HR office. I streamlined vendor payments, renegotiated supplier contracts, saved the company $1,200,000, 0 cents in operational losses in the first 2 years. But when Dad passed away unexpectedly in 2017, everything changed. Not immediately, it was subtle at first. My name started disappearing from client emails. My brother Jason began introducing me as his sister instead of our CFO. My office got moved next to the print room. Still, I stayed. I worked late, managed payroll during the pandemic, talked to creditors when Jason couldn't. I kept my head down, thinking if I just hold everything together, eventually, they'll see me. They didn't. A year after our father's passing, Jason held a board meeting unannounced and had himself voted in as CEO. He said it was to avoid uncertainty. No mention of me, no vote, no conversation. And I let it happen. Why? Because I thought that's what loyalty looked like. Because I thought family would come back around. But I wasn't just loyal, I was naive. What they didn't know, or maybe what they hoped I forgot, was that 6 months before Dad passed, he had quietly updated the shareholder agreement. A 33% stake was signed in my name. It was notarized, filed, final. He'd never told Jason. I found the document a week after the funeral, tucked inside a manila folder at the bottom of Dad's safe. There was a sticky note on it in his handwriting, in case they ever try to pretend you weren't here. I didn't show it to anyone. I didn't want to use it as leverage. I didn't want to weaponize a man's death. But over the years, I watched Jason strip the soul from the company like it was a game of Monopoly. Layoffs without warning, budget cuts without transparency, silencing anyone who didn't fall in line. He turned our father's firm into his personal fiefdom. And through it all, I stayed. Until now. The gala was set for Saturday night, black tie, press coverage, giant LED screen with Jason's face on it and the words 30 years of vision. I was given a lanyard that read Operations Coordinator, no speaking slot, no acknowledgement. That afternoon, I ironed my dress shirt and noticed a loose button near the collar. The threads had worn thin from years of use. I looked at it for a long time, then threaded a needle and reinforced it. Not because I needed to, but because I didn't want anything falling apart. Not that night. That night, I would be seen, not for applause, not for revenge, but for the truth I'd carried too long in silence. I slipped the document into my inside pocket and buttoned my jacket. One final stitch, one final choice. I wasn't the extra button anymore. I was the seam that held everything together. And this time, I was ready to pull the thread. The ballroom smelled like champagne and expensive distraction. Golden lights streamed down from chandeliers that had been rented just for the night. Tall glass centerpieces cluttered every table, filled with white roses that would be dead by morning. My name wasn't on the seating chart. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a clerical thing, maybe an intern's oversight. But when I found my place card, it read E. Ward, Edmund Rowe, Table 14, tucked behind a pillar near the kitchen exit. The table was dressed in the same white linens as the rest, but the silverware was crooked, and the napkin at my seat was folded in half, not even bothering to pretend to be elegant. Across the room, Jason stood under a spotlight, shaking hands, posing for photos, laughing just a little louder than necessary. He looked like he belonged on the cover of a legacy magazine. Tailored tucks, perfect teeth, the confident tilt of someone who thought they'd won. I sat down quietly, my back to the main stage. From where I was, I couldn't see the big screen behind him, just the flickering reflections of his tribute reel playing on a mirror across the room. One of the HR assistants passed by and paused. "Year? Elena, right?" she asked, a little too cautiously. "I think I saw your name on the vendor list?" I smiled, just enough to be polite. "That's probably correct." She walked off without waiting for clarification. Around 8:20, the lights dimmed. A familiar voice, rich and practiced, boomed over the speaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight as we celebrate 30 years of resilience, innovation, and vision." I already knew the script. I'd helped write a draft of it before Jason handed it off to a PR firm and scrubbed my input clean. Photos of construction sites flashed across the screen, steel frames, aerial views, ribbon cuttings. The voiceover continued. In 1993, Robert Ward founded Ward & Stratton with nothing but a folding table, a typewriter, and the belief that family builds stronger foundations. The word family made something twist in my chest. Then came the images of Jason. Jason holding a hard hat. Jason presenting to investors. Jason shaking hands with the governor of Colorado. My father's face faded behind him like a watermark, a ghost in Jason's curated origin story. There were no photos of the finance department, no mention of the woman who kept the lights on while Jason innovated. And I didn't expect it. I didn't need a medal. But I did need one thing. Just one. To stop pretending I hadn't been there. The screen darkened, the applause came, the lights returned. Then a surprise twist. "And now," the host said cheerfully, "we'd like to invite a very special person to the stage, someone who's been part of this journey since the early days. Please welcome Elena Ward." My fork clinked against the table. What? Heads turned. People clapped, some politely, some confused. Jason smiled from the front row, that photo-op kind of smile, the kind you flash when you're about to serve a dish you know the other person isn't ready to taste. I stood up slowly, not because I was caught off guard, but because I wasn't sure which version of myself they were expecting. The compliant one? The loyal ghost? The placeholder with the tight smile? Oh, not tonight. As I stepped onto the stage, I looked out into the sea of faces. None of them had seen the Excel sheets I'd bled over. None of them had sat beside me during quarterly tax reviews or helped me call down vendors during delayed payments. None of them knew, but they would. I took the mic, my voice didn't shake. "Good evening," I said. It's an honor to be here, not just as Jason's sister or someone who helped organize tonight's logistics. I paused, looked directly at him, but as someone who's been part of every blueprint, every balance sheet, and every behind-the-scenes crisis this company has weathered since the day our father brought me into this room and said, "Don't worry about the applause, just make sure the math works." A few polite chuckles, mostly silence. And I did, for 10 years, quietly, without recognition, but not without impact. Then, without raising my voice, I reached into my blazer. Slowly, calmly, I unfolded the paper, heavy stock, notarized. The company's original shareholder agreement signed by my father 6 months before he passed, naming me as a 1/3 owner. I laid it on the podium. "I won't be long," I continued. "I just want this to go on record. You don't have to mention me in the history books, but you cannot erase the ink." And with that, I stepped away from the microphone, leaving the paper behind like a quiet fuse. Jason didn't move. No one did. But the air in the room? It changed. Because silence only works until the truth shows up with documents. 3 days passed. Not a word. No email, no meeting invite, no polite, "Let's talk about that document you dropped in front of 400 guests." Just silence, deep and calculated. I wasn't surprised. Silence, after all, was their favorite currency. It cost nothing and bought them time. Time to regroup, time to rewrite. But I knew what that silence was made of now. It was fear. Not of me, exactly, but of paper. Of proof. Of something that couldn't be gaslit or explained away in a press release. So, I waited. On the 4th day, the email came. It wasn't from Jason. It was from the company's external legal counsel. Request for clarification of ownership rules. Cold, measured. The kind of language that pretends not to be hostile while sharpening the knives behind your back. The attached letter suggested we revisit prior agreements and streamline leadership narratives for public cohesion. They offered me a buyout. 7 figures. Substantial, sure, if you're measuring value in dollars. But what they were really asking was simple. Erase yourself. Quietly. Take this money and vanish from the version of the story we're still trying to sell. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Mara Glass, a lawyer I met 2 years ago at a Women in Finance panel in Denver. Mara specialized in shareholder rights and forensic accounting. She once brought down a hedge fund with nothing but receipts and resolve. We met at a quiet brunch spot outside Boulder. I handed her the file, the original shareholder agreement, backup documents, audit flags I'd been quietly tracking for months. Expense reports padded to fund Jason's Aspen retreats. Bonuses approved through back channels, money moved in loops that looked circular on purpose. She looked up at me over her coffee. "You've been sitting on this how long?" "Since my father died," I said. "And you're not suing?" "I'm not interested in revenge," I said flatly. "I want the part that's mine, and I want to build something they can't contaminate." Mara nodded slowly. "Then we'll make this surgical." The next week, a company-wide female announced my gracious decision to step away from Ward and Stratton after 10 years of invaluable service. I hadn't written it. I hadn't approved it. But there it was, sent from Jason's office, with my name stamped across the subject line like a folded goodbye. Below it was a glossy PDF, press photos from the gala cropped perfectly. Jason with a mic. Jason with a blueprint. Jason with a hand over his heart. I was nowhere in the images. I checked the corporate site. The About Us page had already been updated. My photo was gone. My bio had been replaced with a quote from Jason about leaning into a new era. It was impressive, in a twisted way, how fast they could erase someone who had carried the ledgers during every crisis. But they forgot one thing: I still held my 33%, and I had no intention of selling it. 2 weeks later, I sat in a meeting room, not the old glass-walled box beside the printer they used to assign me, but Marat's downtown office, as we finalized my official separation from day-to-day operations. She slid the paperwork across the table. "They've agreed to your terms. And the equity? Untouched, legally yours." I signed. One stroke at a time. By the time I stood to leave, the air felt lighter. Not triumphant, not even satisfying, just clean. Sometimes freedom doesn't feel like victory. It feels like absence, the absence of waiting, of begging, of explaining yourself to people who were never listening. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove out to a small plot of land an hour outside the city. A place I'd bought quietly last fall, before everything blew open. Just pine trees, gravel, and a view of the sky so wide it made you forget about things like conference calls and quarterly reports. The frame of the new building was already up. Not steel and glass, wood and light. It would be a co-working space, eventually. A resource hub for women-owned startups, built with the dividends of the company they tried to exile me from. But for now, it was just beans and dirt. And me, standing there in worn boots, wind tugging at the edge of my blazer. There was no ribbon cutting, no cameras, just the quiet certainty that all of this, would be mine. And for the first time in over a decade, I wasn't building for someone else's legacy. I was building my own. 6 months later, I hosted dinner in the new building. Nothing fancy: mismatched chairs, string lights from Home Depot, a folding table someone brought in from a neighbor's garage. But the air smelled like rosemary and garlic, and the floorboards creaked in a way that felt honest, like they had stories to tell. The space was still unfinished, but warm in all the ways my old office never was. The walls were lined with sketches and grant applications. In one corner, a whiteboard covered in sticky notes. In another, a toddler asleep in a beanbag while his mother pitched her small batch skincare line to 2 local investors. This wasn't a company, it was a reclamation. We called it the Ledger Room, a nod to the tool they once tried to bury me beneath. Now, the ledger was open, shared, owned, transparent. I didn't need a name on a brass plate anymore. I had a key, I had the deed, and I had the table, not one I was invited to, not one I had to fight for a seat at. I built this one from the ground up, and I chose who sat with me. That night, as people laughed and passed salad bowls down the line, I stepped outside with my wine glass and leaned against the doorway. The summer air in Colorado smelled like new rain on dry wood. I pulled my phone from my pocket and saw a missed call. "Jason." I didn't answer. A minute later, a text came through. "Saw the article. Glad you're doing something with it all. If you ever want to talk just as family, you know where I am." I stared at the screen. There was no apology. No acknowledgement of what had been taken. Just the familiar assumption that I'd be ready to fold back in now that the dust had settled. I set the phone down, screen facing the wood, and walked back inside. Back to the room where women were making plans, children were learning what possibility looked like, and no one had to shrink to fit a name badge. Later that week, a package arrived at the front desk. No return address, just my name handwritten in pen. Inside, a folder of old photos. One of me in a blazer 2 sizes too big, holding a clipboard at the company's first investor showcase. Another, blurry, of me helping Dad hang drywall in the very first office space. Tucked inside was a single Post-it note. "Didn't know you kept everything. Thought maybe you should have this." Well, I held the folder in my hands for a long time. Not with bitterness, not even with sadness, just with truth. I had always been part of the foundation. They just built the walls without me. And when the cracks came, They blamed the weight, never the design. That Sunday I returned to the building before dawn. I brewed coffee, pulled a chair up to the longwood table in the center of the main room, and sat there, watching the morning light climb up the unfinished walls. I took a small envelope from my bag and opened it. Inside was the original shareholder document, the one I'd folded that night at the gala. I unfolded it slowly, flattening its creases, and placed it in the center of the table. Not to gloat, not to preserve, but to mock. This was the blueprint they ignored, the one I followed anyway. Then I placed something beside it, a small brass button I'd saved from the shirt I wore that night, the one I'd restitched by hand. I didn't need it anymore. The seams were stronger now. The threads were mine. And this table? This time? I wasn't the extra button. I was the whole damn jacket.